Welcome to Patrick's Simulation Realities, where the world of conflict simulation comes alive through conversations with the people who shape it. From game designers and developers to playtesters and passionate hobbyists, we explore the stories, strategies, and creativity behind your favorite war games. Dive deep into the art of simulation and discover the minds behind the mechanics. Brought to you by VUCA Simulations, connecting history, theory, and gameplay.
So, welcome back to Patrick's Simulation Realities. My guest today is Fred Serval.
Yes, Fred Serval. Yeah.
Pronunciation. Okay.
Perfect pronunciation.
Very good. And as I don't want to use the podcast only as like a marketing tool for VUCA simulations, we don't want to feature only designers that do games with us, but also with other people in the business and in the hobby. And so
you're talking to people who don't make games with you yet. That's the
not
the
yet.
idea.
Yeah, you're the first one. So I
might become a VUCA designer. Who knows? So
maybe, yeah. Right. So Fred, why don't you tell us a bit about your personal background first?
Yeah, sure.
What's your profession?
Yeah. So I'm Fred Serval. I'm French, as you can hear from my accent. My background is political science, so this is what I was trained in. But all of my career has been in data and statistics. So I've been working for 15 years in this field in different companies. So that actually did have some sort of an impact, but marginal impact on my activity as a war game designer and board game designer in general, but not that much. Maybe more political science in a way than my actual professional background. And I started getting an interest in historical games when I discovered a small game that some people might know called Twilight Struggle. So that's, I think it was around 10 years ago, something like this. I played this and I was like, whoa, this is what board games can be. This is great. I want to play more. And I started just getting a lot of GMT games. And the other thing that really got me into wargaming was a French magazine called Victis. And Victis is it's a very good magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Every 2 months you have a game. Most of it, but not all of it, is hex and counter games. And I really got into hex and counter games, and I started to develop an interest in a wide range of games. So from CDG, obviously, because Twilight Struggle is a CDG, but through my consumption of Victis, I also got into hex and counter games. So I really deep dive into those two different genres of war games. And then after a while, I discovered other kinds of historical games that are not necessarily war related or that have other kind of mechanics. And a few years ago, I decided to design my own games. It was thanks to actually a designer that is working for VUCA, Brian Esclev. Brian Esclev and I were neighbors in Denmark. And I was spending one evening a week at his place playing game, but also playtesting a lot of his designs. And I started getting involved in some of it, having some discussions. And he motivated me to make my first game, which was Red Flag Over Paris, that was picked up by GMT. And I really enjoyed the experience, and I decided, you know what, maybe I should make more games. And this is what happened.
Wow. That's a great neighbor to have.
Yeah, it's a great name. So it was really funny because I got hired by Lego, the toy company, and they moved me from France to Denmark to go and work into their headquarters in Jutland. And it was a very small coastal city. And I was like, oh, I'm leaving Paris where there were so many players, so many people I knew and everything. And I'm going to that small coastal city in Denmark. Will I find someone to play with? So I looked on BGG, and I looked at every player that was referenced as living in Vejle, which is the city that I was living in, that I was going to live in. And I think there were 6 or 7 people, and I looked at all of them individually and looked at their collection, and I was like, okay, Eurogamer. And then I went on Brian's profile, and I was, what the fuck? Who's that guy? And I was like, there is this one guy that plays war games in my city, and he designed war games
Yeah.
for GMT, which was my favorite publisher. And I was like, this is so
Right.
crazy. So I sent him an email, and he was as excited as I am, because there are not a lot of war gamers where we are, and we ended up being just living next to each other, and that was the beginning of our friendship. But
Wow.
and I think it's probably, even if though I had only one opponent, maybe the time of my life where I played the most and discovered the many different systems and really explored game design and all this.
All right. So finally, Brian had a playing partner too.
Yes, exactly. Was very happy to have someone coming to his place every
Very
week
cool.
playing games. That was really cool.
Cool. So you were also living in England, right? In London?
Yes, so I spent 3 years in Denmark, where I was spending at least a day a week with Brian, and then after a few years, I was relocated in London, and I've been working there for 3 years. So playing with Brian a bit less, a bit more online, but we obviously stayed in close contact. And today I'm still working with him on different projects, so we stayed really really close. And so I lived in the UK, and the UK was also a way to meet a lot of different people, because there were more active wargaming clubs. So I had regular players who were playing at the pub. That was really fun. And also I started going to conventions, because there were actually a lot of cool small and big events in the UK. So you have Vanguard, which is a very tiny wargaming event where you're in a small communal room with a few gamers. It's really fun. But then you have also the really big ones. We've met at PunchCon, for example, like big convention. And so it was a very different time. Still playing a lot, but with more than a single player. So that was the big change.
Right. Yeah. So we met last year at PunchCon, right?
Yeah.
This year we have to skip PunchCon possibly.
Yeah.
We're not 100% sure yet. But do you go to other conventions this year?
So this year is going to be a bit tricky for me. I might or might not go to Circle DC, which is the convention of Fourth Circle. It's a if there is one convention in the US I want to do, that would be really that one. Like the people that are there, the people who are organizing, the way it's made, the kind of people you can meet is, for me, like, looks like the best convention I can be. The only thing is that for personal and health related reason, for me traveling is a bit tricky, and going to the US is a very big trip. So that's the only pain point. So I hope I will do it this year. If I don't, I will make it next year, hopefully. But we'll see. Then personally, I go to PunchCon every year. That's my convention of heart, I would say.
Yeah.
So that's in Coventry. That's at the end of spring, and I really, really like it. If I can, I like to go to Vanguard, which is a very small players-based convention, like around 20 people.
So it's in the UK?
It's in the UK, but it's
Right.
very, very tiny. And I went once to Spiel, so in Essen. And it was great, but I would never do it again. So
it's more trade fair than convention, right? So,
but it's really impressive. You meet a lot of people, but it's just too big. It's just
it's
really,
busy.
it's really too big. And this year, I think I'm gonna go to UKG. I've already been to UKG as someone on the industry side. So it was during the pandemic, and people from Nuts Publishing couldn't go from France to the UK. And as I was living in the UK, I actually worked on the Nuts booth, and it was really fun. And I would like to go back there this year in a more casual fashion, because last time I did UKG, I lost my voice because I did 3 straight days of teach and plays, of demoing the different games. And there was one thing that I didn't realize, is that the sound level of a convention is quite high. You tend to speak a lot higher than what you realize. And after 3 days of speaking high straight, with the air is dry, at some point my voice just collapsed. So that was
so UKG is also board game trade fair.
Yeah, it's a bit more trade fair, but it's less busy than Spiel. But it is more like it's more diverse. You have more like I would say mainstream publishers. You've got some historical publishers, you've got people working in magazines, and you've got content creators. But there is also a big section that is actually quite important in the place where you are dedicated to playing. So it's a good mix. I really like UKG. It's just that I've never attended as just someone being there. So and having fun. So I hope to do it this year. And I think that's pretty much it. Unfortunately, we don't really have um, that many conventions in France. We've lost our only historical game convention a few years back.
Which was it?
So that was OPJH. That was
Okay, yes,
in
yes.
in Paris, but it got delayed during the COVID and it never came back. So that's very sad. I think the only convention that I did in France is there was a small convention in the center of France called Asyncron, which was
Yeah,
the convention of Asyncron. And
we'll go there this year for the
yeah,
first time.
it's a very nice. It's a very. I'll probably be there too. So
Cool.
so I'll probably meet you there. And you can do some fun stuff. I think next time I'm going there, I won't have to demo a game because I don't think I'll have a game to demo there. But I'll organize some coin related events just for
Cool.
fun. And then there is Paris Ludique, which is a something that is open air during summer in Paris in a park, which is actually quite fun. And they have a small historical quarter. So this is also something that I've done a couple of years ago. We didn't have it this year because of the Paris Olympics, but it should be back this year. So hopefully I will be there
It's
this year.
just one day.
It's over a weekend, so it's 3 days. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
it's 3 days, and you have a lot of foot traffic. But most of the audience is going to be, I think, 60-70% people coming in family because it's outdoors, so people come with kids. You can just walk around, have a good time, try a lot of
Cool.
different games. It's not really expert audience. You have a lot of people who don't know much about board games who are there, so but you're meeting different people, so it's also quite fun.
Sure. Cool. So, speaking of yourself, so you started playing your first war games like 10 years ago?
Yeah, I would say
Is that
so.
right?
Yeah.
And so, when I look up your name on the Board Game Geek profile, it says that you have designed 5 games.
Is it true? Did I design 5 games? In a
Well,
way,
that's what Board Game Geek says. At
in a way, I
least.
designed more, but in a way, I designed less. It really depends how you look at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, I see. So one of those 5 games is just an expansion for Red Flag Over Paris. So it's not
Right.
a complete design. It's just a small variant for Red Flag Over Paris and additional cards. So there is design work, but it's not like making a game. One of them is a print and play. So it's
Sure.
something that I did for so at some point Punched had a small online magazine. I don't remember if they still have it, but yeah, James had this idea of having an online magazine to have an activity when there was no convention. And for the first issue, I offered to make a free game because I think that, well, when you have a war game magazine, it's always cool to have a free game. So I made a free game. So that's a P&P that you can print at home and play around. So that's Kavlot 1870. And then my 3 official designs, I would say 2 of them released. One is going to be released a bit in a few months. So Red Flag Over Paris, my first one. Just of Robin Hood, my second one that was released last year. So those 2 ones are released by GMT. And then I have a very seal whist that is coming with Phalanx a bit later this year. Should be in spring. And this is also why I want to be in UKG. Yeah.
Right. That's what you're still working on, or is it?
No. A very
away,
good list has been done for me for quite a while now. There was some final playtest at the very beginning of this year, and I made some balance adjustments. We were talking about balance just before. So what you are doing right now for your Traces game is something that I was doing back then. And I have been done with the design for a while, and they were in pre-production, and so now we are in the printing phase. So
okay.
none of the games that I'm working on anymore. Yeah.
Okay. So with your statistics background,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure your games are very balanced, right?
Well, I think they are, but my impressions when it comes to game balance is that um, statistics are not that reliable. There, for me, there is
Yeah.
a big challenge of using statistics for game balance. And usually, what I try to do when I collect data from playtesters is I try to correlate the different win rates depending on the number of repeated plays that you have. I
Mhm.
usually will tend to consider, at least for the games that I worked in, the first few plays of a playtester as almost irrelevant, which might be, don't say that to anyone. But the thing is that usually the first time you interact with a game, especially the kind of games that we make that are a bit more complex, a bit more nuanced, sometimes you have to discover a path to victory. I tend to think that, well, first playtests are usually not very reliable. And I think it's something that you will see in both of my games. Originally, when you start playing, you feel like one faction is more powerful than the other. And the more repeated play you have, and the more you will realize that maybe the other faction is more
Yeah,
powerful than
it
the other.
evens out. Then.
Yeah, no, it actually,
Wow.
in a way, I would say it's not doesn't even evens out. I think when you reach a certain level, the other faction becomes better, and you have a better win rate with the other.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's so when I look at the broad statistics, I see an equilibrium. But when I play competitively, I see that there is an imbalance. I think Red
Mhm.
Flag over Paris was a really great example. When I'm looking at broad statistics, like the game is available on Rally the Troops. So for a lot of plays, I have statistics for all of those games. It's thousands of games that have been played now.
Mhm.
And what I see is it's 45-55 in favor of the Versailles faction. But when I do a tournament, usually the last top four players, they're always winning with the commune, which is so they are in the faction that has a worse meta. But when you're playing at high level, it's usually the best faction. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't know how this works. And those players, I couldn't play against them. They're just too good. So I don't know how they understand the game. But apparently, when
Mhm.
you're getting really good at the game, which I'm not, this is it. This is what happens.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's actually quite fun to see. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you'll never get a 50-50 balance
And
in
but
victory conditions, and I don't
do
think
you
that
want?
matters too much. But
Yeah,
fine.
that's the thing. Do you really want a 50-50 balance in
Yeah.
a because for me 50-50 sounds like a coin flip, so it sounds a bit
Yeah.
random. I feel like if there is an imbalance, it means that you have a design that is saying it's something at least. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it always depends on the historical situation and
Yeah.
so on, right?
Yeah.
So I think at least both sides need to have a
A,
decent
a shot.
chance
Yeah.
of winning, and
Yeah.
that's fine, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So with all these game projects you've been working on, how did it come that you started designing your first games at all?
So I think the idea of making a game on the Paris Commune came into my mind quite early on in my player's journey. Because the thing is that when I started getting really into historical gaming, I really enjoyed looking at specific topics in history, read books, watch movies, and
Yeah.
play games. And I thought it was, for me, a very engaging way to actually get to explore history. And at some point, I wanted to explore the Paris Commune a bit more in depth because it's a topic that I was really interested in, but that surprisingly wasn't covered in French school. So I was like, well, I want to know more about this. I haven't learned about it, and I want to explore. It's a big part of my own history. And I realized that there were no games on the Paris Commune that existed. And it all started from there. And I was reading I don't remember which a war game designer book from the 70s that was basically saying, if you know how to play a war game, you know how to design a war game.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, if there is no game on the Paris Commune, maybe I do have a responsibility individually to make one because I spend so much time playing them. If I want to contribute to the community, maybe this is something that I could do. It's a part of history that is not covered. It's a part of
Yeah.
history that I can have an easier access than other players too because I speak the native language, have access to sources. I even have access to locations where those stuff happen. So maybe that's my maybe I have a purpose here. So it all started from here, but I didn't know really how to approach it. But yeah, I started thinking about it when I was still living in France, and then I moved to Denmark, started working with Brian, and I started to realize better understand how the sausage is made, you could say. And it gave me confidence to actually start working on something. And knowing that I had Brian on my side to actually test the game with me, to bounce off some ideas, gave me enough confidence that I could actually pull it off. So it really started from, I thought that I needed to do a game on that topic. And on the other side, I had the material means, you could say, to actually realize it. The other big shift was that compared to the life that I had in France, when I started working in Denmark, I had a way better work-life balance. So I stopped doing 10-hour days and getting back home at 8, 9 p.m. and being completely exhausted. And I finally had time and space in my mind to actually sit down, read a book, explore, tinker around stuff, and have a creative endeavor next to my work. So that was also a big moment. And I think it's really something that we need to consider, is that being able to design a game comes with also like material conditions. Like not everyone necessarily has the time, the energy, or the space to do such a thing.
Sure.
So in that sense, I feel like I was really lucky. Yeah.
And so then you've built a first prototype. Was it
Yeah.
like on paper or digitally? Or?
First prototype was on paper. This is usually what I like to do. I take a white sheet of paper and I use just a pencil so I can erase it and everything. And this is my first, usually the first version. I still have it for just of Robin Hood, but most of my games I start white sheet of paper and a pencil, and then I put components. So I use either components that I have that are just laying
from
around
existing games.
So either from previous prototypes or from existing games, because sometimes I have a tendency to lose pieces. I think I still have some Levian campaign pieces laying around from I don't know which Levian campaign game, so I have to sort through all of them to realize where I took them from. So I try to be careful and use playtest pieces. But this is usually the first version. I need to have something on paper that I can easily move, erase, and move stuff around. And once I feel that I have something that works, that is going in the direction of my vision, I start actually working in a digital form, very basic artwork and everything. But I want to put it as fast as possible on TTS, because then it makes exposing the prototype to others a lot easier, and engaging with people. But I don't usually broadcast my prototypes. I'm usually quite secretive of them, and there is a small group of people that I trust, that I have like respect for, and sometimes admire as designer, but that are friends and that I interact with. And it's like, oh, I have this idea. Let's play together. Give me your thoughts and everything. And
cool.
And this is for me the first important phase. Like I won't feel comfortable just sharing widely a prototype before having that phase where I can actually tinker with it, but bouncing it on with other people.
All right, so you'll start playing or playtesting on your own.
Yeah.
And then once you feel comfortable, you'll share it with your group.
Yeah, with very specific people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. So you'll do it repeatedly.
Yes.
You always have the same bunch of
people
to test
and then
discuss games.
Once this is, I feel like I get to the like visible prototype, like it's decent, and I feel like I'm not ashamed of it, because this is where people want to get into game design. You will feel ashamed of your first prototype. It's gonna be bad, and you've got to go through that phase as fast as possible. You've got to embrace the fact that it's gonna be bad, and you've got to accept this and just move along and say, well, no one like it's very. I guess some people do it. Like some designer, they come up with a perfect design out of their head. Me, I need to fail a lot before getting to a point where it's interesting. And I try to go through that process as fast as possible in an environment that is as feels as safe and useful as possible. Yeah, exactly. Gotcha. And then once I'm happy with something, then I will start opening up. I have a playtest server on Discord where I think there are 200 people that are interested in stuff that I do. And I say, well, I have this thing. are there among you some people who are interested in it, and then I start sharing it a bit more widely. But I really have those tiered approach on how to do playtest.
Is it mostly French guys, or is it
No,
like
I would say
international?
actually I have in my community French people are a very tiny minority. Most of the
Oh
people,
wow, okay,
yeah.
yeah.
So I'm yeah, I'm not a king in my own country. So so the thing is that yeah, I don't really I I'm not that well known, I think, in the
Okay.
French community because my activity as a content creator has been in English
Yes, true.
for
Yeah,
99% of the time.
yeah.
The game that I designed were with American publishers, so it was mostly like English speaking content makers that reached out to me. So, and a lot of our community is US based, and
Yeah.
yeah, the French community is not that big on speaking English. So yeah, and, most of the people that I work with are based in the UK, based in the US, other places in Europe, but there is not a particularly good representation of French people, which sometimes I'm a bit sad about, but that's just the way it is, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, English is the language for
It's
this
at least the
hobby.
language of
That's for sure.
wargaming, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
But to be fair, we do have a good batch of we have a lot of really good French wargame designers, and we have really a very structured community that has been there for a long time. We have magazines, we've had magazines in the past, so
Yes.
there is a long history of that. And you've got some people, I think Frédéric B is a perfect example of that, who's actively working and making sure that we have war game designed in French. You do have rules in English for people, so it is open to the rest of the world. But there is this idea that we should have, and I really understand and respect that, and I wish I would do more. But we should have a French specific. Like we should have French terms for war game concepts and ideas, and we should have French series and everything. And yeah, people like Frédéric Bay are doing this. They're doing really great stuff. And in a way, I feel like now that I'm moved back to France, maybe I should get a bit more engaged with that side of the hobby and try to participate more into the French school of wargaming. But I mean, it's a process. As I said, most of my formation as a game designer was international, so I come
Yeah.
with that background. So sometimes it's hard. For example, I would feel uncomfortable designing a war game in French. Like my design brain is in English because I
Yes.
read rules in English. I play with people speaking in English most of the time. So when I sit down and work on a design, the words and the concept come to me in English, which is a bit weird. And I wonder maybe it influences some of my design choices. I think it does, at least in terms of concepts. And in a way, I think I would like to try to design something from French at some point. It won't be soon. I think I'll need a bit of time, but yeah, I hope I'll get there at some point.
Yeah, I can relate to that because all the terms and so on,
Yeah,
it's learned in English, so the same for
you
me.
don't. It doesn't come to
But
you in German, I
yeah,
guess. Yeah, most of
yeah.
it. Yeah,
But just on the one game we published, the 1914 Nach
yeah.
Paris.
Not Paris.
This,
Yeah,
yeah, it's done by French designer
yeah,
Bertrand Meunier.
yeah.
And so when you first sent over the prototype files and so on, it was mostly in French. So it
Yeah,
was
it's
quite a challenge to
yes. I guess it must have been.
localize it
Yeah,
to the English language. So
yeah. That's
yeah,
and that's I guess also the challenge. Maybe why even though we have a really good community and a lot of very talented designers, I think most of them start working in French or have a French first approach, and I guess it makes contact and being published externally maybe a bit harder.
right.
So yeah, maybe there's a bit of that.
Okay. So coming back to your design process, so you'll have the internal playtesting,
Yeah.
I would call it, with your group. What about the graphics of your prototype? Will you have made some initial graphic design for it?
So yeah, I usually make all of my prototype art.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not something I'm very good at, but something that I enjoy doing. And it's also so some people say, "Oh, like what your prototype looks like is not important," and I tend not really to agree with that. I think you're gonna share this with a group of people that are taking on their own time to
Yeah.
test a game, most of the time for free to help you make it as good a game as possible. And in a way, I want to give them show them in a way an effort for them to have an enjoyable experience as much as I can with my limited capability. And this comes from, well, making an effort to making the prototype clean, try to make it look a bit good. And our games are very thematic. Sometimes you want to have an emerging narrative, so I try as much as I can to have some visual cues, a bit of artwork that makes it a bit appealing. I'm not great at graphic design, so obviously it's still a prototype, but I still want to put in the effort, and I want the playtesters to see that I've put in some effort for them to have an enjoyable experience beyond just trying a pure prototype. And even for myself, like I prefer to have something, and I think that I project myself better in a prototype if I see the glimpses of what it could be. So I think it's quite important for playtesters. It's quite important for me. So I usually try to make a bit of art. It's always limited. Sometimes I'm lucky. For Red Flag Over Paris, for example, when the game got picked up by GMT, someone reached out to me on Twitter that I've been in contact with, called Donald Hegarty, who's a graphic designer, and we actually started to have a very nice relationship, and we became friends. And he was really passionate about the project, and he offered to actually make, just to support me and support the project, prototype art that would look like they were actually made by an artist, because he's a professional. And it actually helped a lot, because the game was a very tiny game from an unknown designer about a topic that nobody knew about, and all of a sudden people could start to see things that looked like a final product, and they could project themselves, and they could be like, oh, this actually looks like it could be interesting. So in a marketing sense, it also helped the game a lot. So I think I owe Donald to have reached the P500 threshold a bit faster than what it should have been. And I think when you have a pre-order system, also having art is actually quite important. Not all publishers make that effort of having art upfront, and I think it can be important. For playtest, I would be careful, because if you have a lot of art in your playtest, if it's made professionally, then it makes the changes a bit more complicated. And for playtest, I need to be able to change fast. So that's the thing. I need to find a balance between making it look nice and enjoyable for playtesters, but making it practical for me to iterate really fast if I need to.
Sure.
So yeah.
Yeah, Donald's great. So
yeah, he's awesome. He's one of my favorite persons in the hobby. He's a very kind man. He's very talented, so I've always liked his work, and I always enjoyed working with him. But it's also, like, as an individual, it's just nice to spend time with him and work with him. So it's nice to have both. Have someone who's like you, that you admire their work, but also it's a pure joy to work with them, because they are
I've just met him also at PunchCon once, but maybe I have to invite him to the show too.
You should.
If you listen to this, greetings go out to you,
and get some beer ready. That's the thing. That's the fuel for Donald. It works. No, I'm not saying he's an alcoholic, obviously, but you're having fun when you're drinking beers with Donald. That's for sure.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So at what point did you decide to submit your game to GMT, or to connect with GMT for the first time?
So I didn't decide it. It's Brian that decided for me. He told me, I think you have something. I think you should stop messing around, and I think you should send an email to GMT and tell them that you have an idea to expand their Final Crisis series, and just send them an email explaining what you're doing. And I never would have considered doing it. I didn't feel confident enough in doing something like this. I was actually quite scared that they might say yes, because I was like, oh my God, that's a lot of responsibility. But he really motivated me, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I thought, well, they probably won't answer. And I sent the email, and I think 24, 48 hours later, I received an email from Gene, so the boss of GMT, saying, hey, Fred, looks awesome. I would love if you could send me a prototype at some point, and we can play it at the warehouse. And I was like, oh, fuck, now I actually have to to send something to GMT, and this is scary.
Was it a digital prototype, or like?
So I needed to send them files for them to be able to print it and play it physically at the warehouse. And so I had a sort of deadline, and that I managed to meet, which is something that I'm usually bad at. I'm really bad at time management. And they played my prototype at the warehouse, and they were like, "Well, it's not done yet, but you still need some to go some development. But we think there is a really interesting design in there, and we would like it to add it to our P500 lineup. How do you feel about having it added?" I don't know when it was. I think it was in January or February. And I was like, yeah, fuck yeah, for sure. And I had this moment of excitement of being, oh my God, I'm going to release my first game with GMT, which was my favorite publisher, the publisher that got me into historical gaming. So that was like a dream come true. But then at some point when it was added, I had that reality check. It's like, oh my God, I have my first game that's going to be with GMT. Everyone is going to see me fail. So that was the rough.
Deliver.
Yeah. Now I got to deliver,
Yeah.
and it was very stressful.
Okay.
And I think this first experience was really hard for me in that regard, because on one hand, I really wanted this project to succeed because I wanted a game on the Paris Commune to exist. But I was also so stressed because it was going to be the only game on the Paris Commune. That was a topic that was really important to me. And I was like, I need to do good by this event, by the people that went through it and everything. So I was really I was really stressed. It was my first design, and I really had a hard time like compartmenting and realizing it's just a hobby. You're trying your best. It's fine, and and also realizing that there are people at GMT that were gonna help me making the game good. We have great developers. I'm gonna be able to encounter other designers that are gonna give me feedback, which is eventually what did happen. And I think that's one of the great things of having your first game with GMT, is that you don't just have a publisher. I feel like you enter a sort of network of people that I think is really interesting. Once you are in the P500 lineup, you're gonna start chatting with Volko. You're gonna start doing like a lot of different things, meeting a lot of people. I think one of the people that I met really early was Vesarpon, a designer of All Bridges Burning, that also gave me a lot of inputs, helped me make a Vassal prototype, which I didn't know how to make back then, and I still don't know how to make today. like making
it's a very supportive community there.
Yeah, it's a very supporting community. Someone that was actually also pretty important was meeting with Harold Buchanan. That someone that I'm still in frequent contact with, that I enjoy working more on the community side of things with. But yeah, he was making a small CDG at the time, so it was great to actually chat with him, discuss and all this. And in a way, it helped me get to that point where I actually managed to finish the game, not feel too embarrassed by it. But it was a bit of a stressful moment. Now I'm a lot more relaxed about all of this, but at that time it was for me it was very stressful.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So yeah, personally, I remember I've been in one of your YouTube shows.
Yeah.
I guess it's a couple of years ago, right? So you're not only designing games, you're also pretty active in the social media. For the hobby. So tell us a bit about what else you do there. So it's a YouTube channel where you do some live playing sessions.
Yeah, so it evolved quite a bit. So originally it was a channel that was dedicated, just a YouTube channel that was dedicated to introduce people to historical games and war games. And my target audience at the time was my brother, someone who likes board games, who likes history, but doesn't realize that there is something in the middle that is a great hobby, that is historical gaming. And I was like, I want to. Yeah.
It was in English.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I started when I was in Denmark. Actually, it was once again I had more time. I was working in a decent company that was giving me time outside of work, and I thought, oh, I love board games. I want to talk more about them, and I want to get more people into the hobby. And it was really like a evangelization kind of thing. And I started making videos, reviews, and everything. So a bit classic, but I also had this series that I called War Gameology, where I was talking about the foundational concepts of war games, why I liked them, and how they worked. So this was the first idea that I had for making this channel. And so I was making a few videos. It was mostly classic content in the sense that I was making a video, editing it, sharing it. Some of it was more theory, some of it was more review. But it was requiring a lot of work from me, and I had a very tiny audience, and sometimes I could spend, I don't know, weeks working on something. I would release it and it would get 100 views, and
Yeah.
sometimes it felt a bit discouraging. And at some point during the pandemic, I thought, well, you know what, maybe I should stop and I should focus myself on just designing, and this is going to be my contribution to the community, and I should stop the whole content making thing, which was a bit sad because I did like making it. It's just that I was putting too much energy in it, and I was really struggling to see any return on it in a way. And a friend of mine, Sean O'Keefe, who was someone who really liked the channel, tried to convince me and succeeded in convincing me in continuing. And he said, maybe you just need to change the way you approach the content you make. You put too much pressure on yourself, and you don't focus on what you like doing. So what you like doing is actually playing with people, mentoring, discussing with designer. You have a really good network now that you've started making games, and you should just leverage this. And I started streaming. So I started having guests who would play game, who would chat and everything. And it reignited my passion for making content. And it relaunched my channel, and actually it helped me reach a wider audience because I could be more frequent. And it gave me energy to go back and also do more theoretical things, which I enjoyed doing in the beginning, but alternating with stuff that were a bit lighter. So I do a lot of designer interviews, a lot of teach and plays with the designer. I like to have them come in, explain the game to the people around the table, and then you can have all those discussions around playing something and understanding how it connects thematically to the history, so you can have a more organic conversation about the designs. So I like doing this. I like to do panels, get people from a wide variety of, from a wider horizon where we talk about a specific topic, and like the depiction of colonialism, depiction of civilian victimization, the myth of the clean Wehrmacht, all of those kind of things. I think it's really interesting to have like discussions that push the hobby forward, and have a space where you can have an academic, a designer, talking to each other and creating a space where you can have interesting, useful conversations. I think for the hobby, for people to think forward. And I feel like those spaces existed a lot in the early days of wargaming. When you look at the general magazine from Avalon Hill, or those magazines from the 70s, I feel like those were really spaces where a lot of ideas were exchanged. You had debates, and I don't see that anymore. When I look at most wargaming magazine, I see magazines that are either very commercial because they come from a publisher. So it's actually the magazine from MMP, it's the magazine from, I don't know, who other else. Or you've got some magazines that are very journalistic. And I feel like those early magazines were more open, like more free, and created a space for the hobby itself to
it's
to
like
move forward.
Battles magazine.
Yeah, Battles magazine was
so
the
good.
last one. Yeah,
it was so good.
And for me, we miss a Battles magazine. Like, we need one. Like, Battles magazine was amazing because you had designer coming in, talking about their thoughts about the hobby and everything. You had crazy, insane designs. You had a very wide, very different range of people doing reviews on it. And it was not restrictive, the kind of games that were covered. It was historical in a way or another. You could get in. Like, you could do stuff. Like, it was not, it has to be a hex encounter, or it has to be this kind of game. It was very free. And I think this is what we miss. And in a way, what I do on the channel is very inspired by what Battles magazine was, but just in a video format. About
a wide range of topics
and people intervening and everything, and try to like have interesting conversations, and not do unboxings. Which is, I mean, it's great, it's cool, but I don't think we need more of it. And I wanted to create something like when I would do with games. I wanted to create a channel where things that would happen on that channel didn't necessarily happen elsewhere, and this was like a mission. It's like, okay, but where do we have those discussions? And that was the idea.
So how frequent do you publish stuff on your channel? How can people find your channel?
So the channel is Homo Ludens. So if you look for Homo Ludens on YouTube, you will find it. Now the Homo Ludens media empire is a bit bigger, so we now have a podcast also, and the podcast has different
Cool.
series in it. So you've got some podcasts where you have like collective reviews. So I like to have people from the Homo Ludens community coming together to talk about a game because we have something called Le Club de Jeu. So if you support the channel on Coffee, you get access to the Discord server. And then on Discord server, we have the system where people nominate games. If they get enough nomination, we create a space for it. And people will get in there, learn the game together, play the game together. And after a certain point of time, they're going to record a podcast together. And the idea is to have... And I really like the idea of collective reviews because it's not just an individual talking about their experience about the game. It's people bound like exchanging ideas about a game, and you see it from different perspective. And I feel like when you're actually discussing about a game in depth, you sometimes come with insights that you wouldn't necessarily have naturally making your own review. So yeah.
That sounds great. So it's also about strategic approaches to victory.
Strategic approaches, historical depiction, like what you like. The discussion can go in a lot of very different direction. And I think like one of the latest one that we've done was on successors, and like the kind of discussion that you have is really cool when you're doing this review collectively. So that's cool. Pretty cool. We talk about the different editions of the game, and people will come with different level of experience. Some people had never played a CDG before. Some people had played all of the versions of successors and can actually compare them with each other. So it's quite fun.
So where can we find this podcast?
So the podcast, you can find it on any podcast platform. You look for Homo Ludens and you will find it.
Same name.
Yeah, it's the same name, and we have a big series happening right now on Homo Ludens called "We Intend to Move on Your Works." That is done by Stuart Ellis Gorman and Pierre Vanier Jones, who are two persons who have a historical background. Stuart has a PhD. Pierre has a master's degree, and they go through all of the U.S. Civil War chronologically, and they play games chronologically, and they talk about the different depictions and everything, and it's super interesting. And yeah, so the idea is that we are going to have more of that, like very thematic kind of topic. Cool. I'm going to start one with an historian on the Clean Wehrmacht, where we look at war games and their depiction of the East Front over time. So games in the 60s, game in the 70s, 80s, up to now, and see how this depiction evolved. Did we catch up to the historiography? Like we know that over the last 30 years, the way we see the Wehrmacht, how it's depicted, has changed quite a lot in history. It did start changing in media, but did it really change in wargaming? And so that's having those more like foundational discussions. So that's the idea. But yeah, you can find the podcast on any podcast platform. You can find it on Spotify, Apple's, all that stuff. The YouTube channel is on YouTube, so if you look for Homo Ludens, you're going to find it there.
And what was the frequency of the episode?
Oh yeah, so it really depends on my mood. So that's the thing. At the moment, I'm doing a stream every Sunday, and I have up until early March streams that are planned every Sunday, and I think I'm going to keep that schedule. On top of that, sometimes I have streams that come up during the week. Some of them are pajama streams. So pajama streams is a stream that you do in the morning. And we hope to get people in their pajamas when they come to the stream, and you have a more casual play of something. Sometimes designers come to those pajama streams, but it's way more laid back. We don't necessarily play a new game. Sometimes it's an old game. It's a bit more casual, whereas the Sunday stuff are like following what's happening in the hobby. And I also have videos that I work on that are recorded. So you also have like recorded videos that get released. And I'm going to start releasing more reviews this year. So short form reviews where I actually look at a game and say, oh, this is what I like about it. So yeah, I have a bit of content. But yeah, the content frequency is actually quite big right now.
It sounds you sound like a very busy person.
I make myself busy on my own. Like no one is asking me. It's just that I'm the worst boss you can get. Like I'm my worst boss.
Passion for the hobby.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So is there any other game projects you're working on?
Yeah, sure. Actually, there are few. So there is a game called Napoleon 1870 that I designed with Brian Eslev. So it's our first co-design. And it's in the series Conqueror series by Chacos, where you have Napoleon 1806, 1807, 1815. But we translated the system to the Franco-Prussian War.
Cool.
So, and what I'm really excited about for this game is that we wanted supply to be a thing because it's a lot more important. It was important in Napoleonic warfare, but at the scale of the game, it was not as important. Whereas in 1870, it is important at that scale. And we wanted to do something where supply and supply lines was depicted in the game without changing the foundation of the game, the series.
Yeah.
And so we managed to do this, and I'm really happy with the result. So the system is exactly the same. If you know how to play Napoleon 1806, knowing how to play Napoleon 1870 is going to be super easy. Like the number of rules that changes is very minimal. It's more like a scenario specific. But then the deck, so the things that will happen when you're playing the game are going to be radically different. And this is where I think we really find an interesting design space with Brian. I'm really excited about it. And I just received the cover yesterday, so that's
cool.
going to be really cool. And it should have a Kickstarter later this year. So first half of the year, I think there is going to be a Kickstarter campaign for it. So there is that. I'm also working as a developer on a few games. So I'm working with Brian because he has a game in P500 called Baltic Empires. So there is this. And it's going along nicely. A very nice artwork are coming out. Niels is doing the art. I don't know if you...
Cool.
Yeah, Niels is...
Johansson, right?
Yeah, Niels Johansson, which is completely amazing, insane graphic designer. But yeah, and he's doing work for Baltic Empires that is really fascinating. And then I have smaller projects on the side, but I'm still looking for what's going to be my next big historical game design. I don't know yet. I have a few things that I have in the back of my mind, but it's still pretty unclear. And also I have Brian that's probably going to come to France, spend a bit of time with me in March. And
cool.
He really wants to... we had a project for quite some time now of making a series of grand operational, like between operational and strategic war games, point-to-point war games.
Which period?
So the period that we're looking for is end of First World War. Actually, no, I would say first half of the 20th century. That's the idea. So having this. And so we want to do this series. We already have a few topics. Brian already has a couple of prototypes. I have one that I'm supposed to do on Ethiopia, Italian invasion of Ethiopia. And we have this thing. We know that we need to do it. We've been wanting to do it since we, I guess, started playing together. In a lot of ways, it shares a lot of similarities with Napoleon 1812. A lot of the discussion that Brian and I, when he was working on this, was part of a wider discussion that we had about making a system for modern war, like more like 20th century, first half of 20th century warfare, sharing a lot of the same concepts. And I guess we'll see. Maybe that's going to be the next big thing. I'm not sure, but it will eventually come. But yeah, so nothing clearly defined yet, but I hope to have some stuff coming up. But Napoleon 1870 is the next thing. The design is done though on this one, so I'm not really. I'm mostly working on practical stuff, scenarios, balance, those kind of things. But the design itself is done.
Cool. Yeah, Brian's very, very active too.
He's
very creative. We got 2 games with him in the pipeline. And
that's a problem that I have that we have working together is that my workflow is like I can be very inactive for a while and just play games and do content and everything. And then all of a sudden I'm gonna come up with a full design over I don't know a few days, and then I'm gonna disappear for a while and then come back. Whereas Brian is always exactly. Brian is always like he's a train. Like Brian
is always on top of a wave.
Yeah. He's always on the top of the wave. So it's really hard for me to follow him. that he has to catch me on the top of the wave so we can actually do a lot of progress, and I can disappear and he can and he can continue with his life. But yeah.
Cool. So, apart from your own designs, is there any topic or some game you would love to see?
Games that I would like people to make designs about.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think there is a big wave that has been happening. Like I wanted to see more historical games on social movements, like miners' strikes in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
In the late 19th century, early 20th century against Pinkertons and stuff like this. Like stuff that are a bit more that are not necessarily wars, but political conflicts, or sometimes even have some kinetic components to it, like stuff
Right.
that explore social history,
Uh-huh.
which I think that are often underrepresented in game, and I think gaming is actually a great format for it. And we had in the past, like in the 19th century, you had the early 20th century, you had the suffragetto game, the game where you had suffragettes striking and fighting the police. So, like a century ago, you had a lot of those games that existed that were published
Mm-hmm.
in political magazines and everything. And I would like us as a community of designers, as a community of hobbyists, to actually explore like more different kind of topics. But I feel like this is really happening. There is more and more games like this, and I feel
Yeah.
it's really exciting. I'm also really excited about stuff that Salt and Pepper are doing right now. This Spanish publisher, they have a new game called Habemus Papam
Uh-huh.
about the conclave for the election of the Pope in the Vatican. And I really like to have those things where you explore different kind of things, different kind of topics. So yeah, this is mostly what I'm looking for, and I hope to see more of it. I think it's super interesting. And then what else am I looking for? That's a good question. I feel like the hobby is so active, so many cool things are happening.
Yeah.
I feel like there is a bit of a, I don't know how it is on the publisher side, if it's easy to sell those games or anything, but I know that from a player side, if I don't think of, if I remove my designer hat, I see a lot of new publishers doing exciting stuff. I
Yeah.
see the games being more creative visually, which I think is like board games are a visual medium, and I want
Yeah.
the visuals to
Absolutely.
evolve and move forward. You can still make hex encounters, but you can also rethink the way they are portrayed. And I think what you guys are doing is a perfect example of that. Like it's really cool to see. So I would say I'm pretty content with what's happening. I hope for things to happen, but it feels like they are happening. So I'm
Yeah.
just riding the wave, enjoying
Yeah.
myself.
There's
I
there's
think
lots
it's
of
great.
games coming out, right? And
Too many to play. That's the thing.
yeah.
So I it would be shameful. It would be shameful for me to ask for more games, knowing that I
Yeah.
cannot play the ones that I have. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
there are. The thing that I would like to see though is uh, people depicting topics in a bit more challenging way. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like maybe we have too many East Front games that are
Mm-hmm.
doing East Front games the same way it was done 40 years ago. And I'm always thinking, why do you spend so much energy uh, doing this and not trying to bring something new? Sometimes it's the thing that it's not that I'm not saying that those games shouldn't exist, but I'm always wondering, why would you spend so much time and energy doing this?
Right.
And yeah, and sometimes I feel like we purposefully or unconsciously remove some aspects of the events that we are portraying out of habit,
Mm-hmm.
also out of incomfort. And I think this is what I would like to see. It's like, oh, you're making a game on, I don't know, bombing campaigns in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Like the impact of civilian casualty was
Mm-hmm.
critical in the strategy, in the effect of the campaign, in how successful it was. Maybe it should be visible in your game. Like it cannot be just a purely kinetic thing. Like you need to talk about the consequences of what you've done. And but once again, some publishers like Hollenspiel doing great stuff in that direction. And I feel like more and more publishers are trying to be more like look at the topics that they're covering
Mm-hmm.
in a broader and a newer sense. So I would like more of this, but I feel like it's happening, so I cannot complain. I feel like
Yeah. Right.
the hobby is going in a great direction. I'm very optimistic, I
Yeah.
would say.
Cool. All right. So I guess we are at about 1 hour.
Yeah.
And I got so many questions left. So we're
I have time. You can
have
picture.
I guess you have to come back at some point.
Oh, I would
maybe
be
later this
happy.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. So
Yeah.
it was a great
Yeah.
conversation, and it really gets me thinking about certain aspects of our hobby.
Yeah.
In such a discussion, that's great.
Good, but it was really fun. As I said, I'm usually not in this side of the
Right,
conversation.
you're asking questions otherwise.
But
Yeah.
it's actually quite enjoyable, and it felt really like a discussion. So I really appreciate that you taking the time and inviting me, and I would be happy to come back and answer all the other questions that you didn't ask this time.
And who knows? Maybe we can meet at a convention, Asyncron. That'd be great for sure. So
Yeah,
we'll be
we'll,
there,
we'll,
and
it's really next to. It's really not far from where I live, so I will surely be there.
Oh,
so
cool.
so we'll probably meet at
Can
that.
you go back home?
No,
in the night?
it's no,
Okay,
it's too far. No, too far. I have to sleep there.
Right. Yeah, that'd be great to meet up there.
Yeah.
And cool. All right.
Great.
So let's stay in touch.
Yes.
And I wish you all the best success with your coming game projects. And
well, same to you. I have high hopes in VUCA, so I hope that to keep the high quality release in the future. And who knows? I was joking at the beginning of the stream, but who knows? Maybe we'll get to work on the project together. That would be really fun.
Sure. Cool. All right. So take care.
Yeah. Take care.
Thanks for listening.